quite a varied crowd you had here. I hope I'm not the panto villain. I'm going to tell you a bit about the blog, give you my take on what's going on in political reporting, and if we've got time, I'll go on about Leveson, libel hacking, and how to break super-injunctions. I started up in September 2004. Whenever bloggers talk, they always talk about traffic. I had about 600 hits. Most of that was me pressing refresh to see if anyone had left a comment. Had a couple of good stories. It was sort of underground, and it was only read really by people in Parliament and the political journalists, and kind of had a little bit of a following. And then, I had some big stories, and nowadays, we get a few million hits a month, which is good because advertising pays. Just to give you an idea, this is a bit old. Gossip is very attractive. So nowadays, I think New Statesman's improved and is sort of further up, but my rivals at The Spectator and the New Statesman, maybe The Spectator's on about the same kind of traffic as we are, which is quite good when they have like a dozen people and there's just two of us. That has allowed us to be sustainable. If we didn't make money, we wouldn't be in business. The whole blog is about scandal in Westminster and what's going on and what people don't want you to know rather than what people want you to know. It's written really for people on the inside. We're pretty obsessive, and it's written for political obsessives. It's just a happy byproduct that thousands of students and other people who are vaguely interested in politics come along. And they usually come along when there is a scandal about, or there's some stress point, or there's some contentious thing like, currently now people want to come along and find out what Ken said today that's made him look stupid, whether Boris has fallen off his bike and stuff like that. So that will probably be our daily staple for the next few weeks. The blog has some credibility. It's not Reuters. When it says on the top corner there, tittle-tattle, gossip and rumours, you know that it hasn't been stood up by 3 different sources. If it's something that's been going on in a bedroom that shouldn't have been going on, very rarely will both of them confirm to you what's been going on. So you have to accept that sometimes we do make mistakes. Sometimes stories are too good to double check because they're... Harry, who's my number 2 and writes most of the blog nowadays, when he first started to me, I said to him, "Did we double source that?" He said, "I called him twice." We shoot from the hip. It's no secret that we shoot from the right hip, but we have a go at all the parties, just like the Swedish Air Force used to practice 4 days a week flying against the Soviets, and on Fridays they'd practice fighting NATO. We tend to fly against Labour more often than not. That's not so much fun now because they're not in government and nobody's that interested in what they're doing, but still we like to concentrate our fire on them. It used to be that the diaries were our main competition because gossip is sort of in the same field. And now that blogging is just the same as being in newspapers because nobody reads newspapers anymore and they all read it online, the competition is much more intense because before we used to get phone calls from people in the room when things happened, and the journalists who were in the room would then write it up the next day, and it would be old news to all the people who'd read the blog. Now they get out and they tweet and they write it up. It's a real pain in the arse that they've got quicker, I can tell you. The first story that really got me attention was basically something I was just Googling around and found this poster on the Labour Party website. This is in the 2005 election, and I thought, that looks a bit iffy. Michael Howard, who was the Tory party leader then, is Jewish. So I did some extra research, Google Holocaust Museum. I thought that looked quite bad. So using my extensive network of contacts, newsroom@thesun.co.uk, newsroom@thestandard.co.uk. I put it around, I thought it was a good story, and next thing I know, it's on the front page of The Standard. And for 2 days, of The Standard being more experienced journalists, actually called people as well, and got the candidate in Finchley, which is a very Jewish area, to give a comment saying it was terrible, and it was a real problem for Labour for a couple of days. They took the posters down, and that was that. So that was the thing that got me from having 600 readers a month to 30,000. Then we had some other successful stories. Peter Hain, he forgot to declare £100,000 of expenses. You know how that is. Campaign limit is 100,000. You spend 200,000, and you forget about half of it. Unfortunately for him, he was horrible and dissed a teenage guy working for him. This is a lesson. Be good to the people on the way up, because you might meet them on the way down. And that unhappy staffer sent me a spreadsheet, which led to him resigning from the cabinet, being humiliated, etc., etc. So that was the first major scalp we've got. But most of the time, our best stories do come from the junior people. We don't often get to speak to people in the cabinet or the Prime Minister. It's usually the staffers and the special advisors and people lower down the food chain who are our best sources. Preza, he was another one who got into loads of trouble. Do you remember he had gone off to the States to meet a billionaire who gave him some cowboy boots, etc., and who was going to open up a casino in the Dome, what's now called O2 Arena. And it was a little bit awkward, and the guy on the Times who was covering the story called me up and said, "Listen, Paul, I've got this scandal we're going to be running tomorrow. It's about, possible corruption issue here. He's got cowboy boots and a belt and a cowboy hat." And I was drunk on holiday in France, and I thought, maybe it's a good time to run that story about his mistress. So you had a combination of a serious story about financial misdeeds and a fun story about, Preza's mistress. And the combination of the two were very difficult for Prescott. And next morning on John Humphrys on the Today Show, he's quizzed about this. And he says something like, these blogs, I don't know anything about them. Now, of course, he's got 100,000 followers on Twitter and his own blog. But that was the other story that probably got us some notoriety. This, Julian promised me, was a video that was going to play. We don't just do scandal, we do some fun things. Just click it again, it'll go. See, I knew that was it. So we used to try and demonise Gordon quite a lot. This is back when he was a budget day. Now, he's got 200 Tories sitting on the opposite benches. Do you think anyone would notice? I like this when he hides it on the tie. Whatever you think about Osbourne, he didn't do that yesterday, did he? That's how you get 500,000 hits on YouTube, by the way. Quite easy. And we used it to promote a book, obviously, because we're always trying to make money. The story that probably was the one that ended the idea that blogs couldn't compete with newspapers was the Damon Bride story. His resignation statement mentions me about 4 times, complaining about how he'd been brought down by a conspiracy. Actually, he'd been brought down by his stupidity with Derek Draper. Usually when I talk about this one, I'm asked, why didn't you run it on the blog? Why did you give it to the papers? Well, my wife is a lawyer, and she's quite feisty, and when I told her that we had this story that we'd got in a way that I probably don't want to go into in the current environment, she had a fit, told me to get counsel's opinion. 3 barristers told me I could go to jail. So given there were also copyright issues, and the week before, Special Branch had kicked down Damien Green's door looking for missing documents, I thought, well, maybe I'll give it to the newspapers and let them worry about all the issues. I didn't sell it, which is what people sometimes think I did, because my wife told me if I sold it, the whistleblower laws wouldn't protect me. So we took it to The Sun and the Sunday Times to maximise the impact, because sometimes newspapers will be bought off, believe it or not. If you take them a great story, they won't run it because the deal they have with Downing Street or whatever to give them another story, the Queen's pregnant or whatever, will cover up that story. I don't want to give you the impression that we only do anti-Labour stories. When the change of government came along, everyone said, you're going to be finished now because you're not going to have the same vitriol and viciousness against the Conservatives. So within a couple of weeks, we started asking a couple of questions about William Hagues' new special advisor. Now, the thing about special advisors in the Foreign Office is it's one of the most elite fast-track jobs you can get. So why would you give it to someone who went to a second-rate university, got a second-class degree, had no experience, and basically his only experience was driving you around during the election campaign? So we asked a few questions, and we also had a room they'd shared a room. Now, I was very wary about running this story because in the past, when people have been accused of sharing a room, what's happened is 2 invoices have appeared and there's been 2 rooms booked. So it was quite nerve-wracking for us. So we sent a Freedom of Information request in to ask about it. This, of course, caused absolute chaos for me. All the Blue Rinse readers, when I went to Conservative Party conference a few weeks later, were spitting at me, saying a third of the sort of old Colonel Blimp types were saying, well, we always knew there was something fishy about him. And another third was saying it's absolute rubbish. I've never really got to the bottom of it, but, it was a bit awkward, wasn't it? And I never said that William Hague was gay, but I did say his special advisor was. I don't know if you know how political reporting works in this country, but we have a system called the lobby. Now, this is a gentleman's club, or what I like to call a criminal cartel, that works on special terms. They have special rights to have the Prime Minister's spokesman come visit them and tell them stuff that's off the record or on lobby terms, which means that they can be told something by a politician. The politician will go on Newsnight that night, say the complete opposite, and the journalist can't report that because of the deal that they've cut. And I don't think that works. I think the lobby system is a obedience school where journalists learn to do what they're told, they get tidbits, and they come to heel. And I get on my high horse about this, and surprisingly enough, when my number 2, Harry, tried to join the lobby, he was refused for some reason. But I think that thing where they go in and say, according to Downing Street sources, that means they've all been sat in the same room getting the same briefing. And it's not really great investigation, it's more like copy taking or taking down dictation. Just recently, I had a session at the Leveson Inquiry. I had actually 2 summonses to go to the Leveson Inquiry. The first one was because the weekend before Alistair Campbell was going to give his evidence, I published the evidence on the blog. The judge went completely mental, and Leveson said, this is terrible, check the security on the computers, summons me to come in. There was all talk about I was going to go to jail for contempt. An inquiry is like a court, the way the laws are established. But they changed the laws after the Hutton inquiry when everything was leaking, and they messed up the laws for the new inquiry laws. So on the Monday morning, I'm watching the live stream on the computer, and I have Lord Chief Justice Leveson and the highly expensive barristers talking to each other, and I can watch it on TV saying, well, can we actually, has he done anything wrong? No, my lord, you have to put an order in to protect the evidence in the first place. So they make this order to make the evidence restricted. And I'm thinking, well, even a judge can't restrict something that's already out there. And I didn't receive it. So I left it up for the whole day. And at 4 o'clock, when it was coming to the end of play, they have another session where the judge and his lead barrister are chatting to each other and say, well, has he taken it down? No. Well, has he received the order? And I hadn't received the order. They'd sent it to a publisher who I had done a book with about 5 years ago who didn't know what it was all about. And the situation was pretty ridiculous. Anyway, I hear the reports on the news stations that I'm summoned to appear on Wednesday, even though I don't have the summons. So I call up the next morning and say, I think you're looking for me. And they say, well, yeah, come along on Wednesday, put in your evidence how you got this. And loads of barristers offered to work for me for free, all pointing out that I didn't have anything to worry about since he'd already had to give the order on the Monday to tell me I was in trouble. Clearly I couldn't have been in trouble on Saturday. So I put in the evidence, but the gist of the evidence was that a journalist gave it to me, and I reckon he got it off Alistair Campbell. So I didn't hack the computers or anything like that. It was just Alistair Campbell leaking. Who'd have thought it? Campbell, first thing he said when he was on the evidence was, I sent it to a few friends, but they would never leak it to him. I don't know how he got it. And they didn't bother calling me. Anyway, they called me a few weeks later to talk about things. If you've been watching the Leveson, sometimes it's been really compelling, you know, when they've had Heather Mills up or when they've had Piers Morgan up about what's going on. And in the beginning, when I was watching Leveson stuff and thinking about Leveson, I thought he was going to be a menace to the freedom of the press. And I also thought he didn't have a clue. I now think he's quite a wily old character, and he does know what's going on. And he knows that all the papers have been hacking and blagging people's information for decades. And he's sitting on 300 journalists who've committed crimes. There was a police-led investigation done by the Information Commissioner called the Motorman investigation. And I've seen some of those files. And every single newspaper was at it. And he knows it. And I had this row with the judge, and he was saying, I said, I think you've got the Motorman files. Why don't you publish them? Let the victims see. Because I think as soon as the victims know, and I'm talking about, you know, grandmothers who were doorstepped. Their son, their grandson was backpacking in Asia, died. Next thing you know, someone from the Daily Mail is trying to get pictures of your grandson. And they've got that illegally by getting information off someone they know in British Telecom or from the DVLA. That's a crime. And you know, people have been bribing the police just to find out if soap stars have been spending the night together. I don't think there's a public interest for that. I think there's a public interest defence for when you're going after serious issues, but not tracking down soap stars. The press obviously don't want to go anywhere with this. News International is currently the bad boy, but you've got to think about it. Those files show that the Mirror Group actually was up to it more, but probably if they had if Andy Coulson hadn't gone to Downing Street, I don't think News International would be in the trouble it is now. But all the papers are at it, and they don't want this to go any further because they don't want a circular firing squad going on. Because once it kicks off, lots of journalists whose bylines that you see will be in trouble for committing crimes, each of which has a 6-month jail sentence, possibly. And I named Gordon Rayner, who was the Daily Mail's chief reporter at Leveson, because I've seen his file, and because he did me over, so I thought I'd get him back. Well, he actually told me, he tracked me down. I said, how did you do that? I'm really cautious. My phone is at my name, my bank accounts aren't at my home address. How did you find me? He said, oh, we got your wedding license, and we found a flat, a one-bedroom flat. Obviously, it wasn't the one you're living in, but we found your wife's name. It was a flat she had before we got married. And from that, I went to the land registry, and we tracked out where you live now. And I said, well, you can't do that. The land registry is not like a phone book. You can find someone's address and find out who owns it, but you can't put someone's name into the system and find out where they live or what property they own. He actually told me to my face that he'd blagged the system. Anyway, he's responsible for 335 offences in the Operation Motorman book, and 185 of them are illegal. So he's looking at 50 years in jail if it all gets prosecuted. We shall see. I suspect it won't go anywhere because too many journalists are guilty. I did say if I had time, I don't know how I'm doing for time, I would tell you how to break a super-injunction. Just do it. It's not that hard. So I tweeted the names of my own five-a-side football team, starting with Ryan Giggs, and I said this would be a great football team, and then I named 2 managers I think should be involved and a couple of substitutes. And obviously it was a joke that I was just naming all the footballers who had injunctions about their extramarital affairs. I don't think the Human Rights Act, when it was drafted in the 50s in Europe, It was drafted to protect people living under oppressive regimes, not to protect Ryan Giggs from a bit of extramarital embarrassment. It's just a complete misuse of the system. And in other European countries, you cannot use the Human Rights Act to stop your wife finding out what you've been up to. And I think if we had more of an effort by the press to break the injunctions, they wouldn't stand. The reason they don't push their luck with them is because we've got about 3 judges who have made law from the benches and who are before they became judges, were libel lawyers. And they are basically working in cahoots with about half a dozen libel firms in London to stop us finding out the truth. So I'm pretty confident, and I've broken these injunctions time and time again. Currently, the last one I broke was the Sultan of Brunei's wife. She had someone whacked, in Australia, and she's got away with it. She's got about half a dozen injunctions going off in Australia, Singapore, and here. And these have been standing for like 3 years. It's just not right that multi-millionaires can buy secrecy. And I'm confident that I can break these, and I won't go to jail because I don't believe British judges will jail people for telling the truth. If I'm wrong, I'll see you later.